In the scorched silence of the desert, where the horizon dissolves into eternity and time crumbles like sun-bleached stone, a name once spoken with awe has faded into near-forgotten winds. Akhenaten. He was not merely a king, he was a rupture in the divine continuum, a heretic crowned in gold, an architect of madness veiled in holy purpose. And yet, of all the crimes for which he was erased, blasphemy, iconoclasm, spiritual revolution, the most forbidden, the most whispered, was love. Love that crossed sacred lines, love wrapped in the same blood. He married his sister, not as scandal, but as scripture, not as weakness, but as worship. The ancient world did not tremble at incest. Among kings it accepted it, embraced it, because the Pharaoh was more than mortal. He was the son of Ra, the breath of the gods, the binding thread between man and divinity. To dilute that blood with outsiders was to betray the heavens themselves. So brothers lay with sisters, fathers married daughters. The throne became not just a seat of power, but a circle of entrapment where love was not chosen, but ordained. Akhenaten, however, took this tradition and turned it into doctrine. He dismantled the cosmos. He declared Aten, the visible sun, as the sole god. He declared himself as Aten's voice, and his wife not merely a queen, not merely a consort. But his genetic mirror became the feminine reflection of his divine will. Her name is shrouded in confusion. Nefertiti, they say. But the records twist and vanish. Some believe she was not Nefertiti at all, but a sister whose name was buried to hide the truth. Perhaps Mut-Benret, perhaps Bekhetaten. Whoever she was not just a woman. She was a symbol, a ritual act, a living contradiction. Together they ruled not with steel, but with sacred theater. Their art warped the traditional. No longer did pharaohs stand as stoic gods. In Akhenaten's world, they touched cheeks, kissed lips, wept in stone. His family became divine performance, and the people watched, confused, afraid, fascinated. Inside the great sun temples of Amarna, the air burned with incense and unspoken dread. The statues showed a world reshaped, elongated limbs, swelling bellies, faces that looked neither man nor woman. It was not beauty, it was something older, alien. Perhaps Aten demanded it. Perhaps it was madness, sculpted into law. Or perhaps it was the slow decay of a bloodline turning inward on itself. The children born from his sacred union did not live long. Deformities, stillbirths, silent funerals behind palace walls. One child, Tutankhaten, later Tutankhamun, would survive, barely to rule and then die, his body broken by divine genetics, his tomb untouched for centuries, waiting to expose the cost of incest made holy. But while Akhenaten lived, the illusion held. The sun rose for him alone. The gods fell silent, and his sister wife remained ever by his side, equal, unknowable, necessary. She was not merely loved, she was consumed, a reflection he could not escape, a mirror that stared back too closely. Perhaps that is why her image, later, was shattered, her name erased. Perhaps the priests could forgive the heresy, but not the love that defied nature itself. When Akhenaten died, the empire sighed in relief. His city was abandoned, his gods were buried. The old names returned, and with them, vengeance. Every trace of his reign was scraped from stone. His children's lineage was rewritten. His sister vanished into dust. But history is a tomb that never stays sealed. And in the shattered reliefs, in the bones of a boy king, in the twisted lines of DNA that tell tales stone cannot, the truth still whispers. He married his sister and called it holy. They called it divine symmetry, this union of mirrored souls in the same blood, the same womb, born under the same stars, shaped by the same gods, and molded by the same palace walls that echoed with chants of eternity and the weight of expectation. As children, they were inseparable shadows, watching the priests in golden collars raise incense to dying gods. As adolescents, they were instructed not in affection but in alignment. The priesthood whispered, "The throne is not a chair, it is a vessel, and the vessel must be sealed with purity." In that silence, a love was born not of passion, not of rebellion, but of inevitability. And what is more terrifying than love, that was never chosen. Together, they performed the rites together. They looked upon the golden Aten and sang praises not as mortals, but as avatars. She was not his wife. She was his reflection, his echo, his divine twin. Their faces became indistinguishable in temple art. In some reliefs, she wore the crown. In others, he bore the curves of creation. Gender unraveled beneath the heat of theological obsession. The court watched and trembled, not daring to question the shape of their god-king, who now worshipped only light, yet cast shadows darker than the Nile at midnight. Servants whispered of their nights of strange rituals where the queen would anoint the king with oils meant for childbirth, where offerings were made not to gods but to each other. The lines between brother, husband, father, creator blurred until nothing remained but roles carved into flesh by myth. And yet something deeper stirred in their union. Not just ambition, not just tradition. To look into your sister's face and see yourself is to feel eternity devour identity. There is no separation, no friction, no chase. Only feedback, only echo. And Akhenaten lived in that echo, day after day, drinking from the cup of sameness, whispering to her in the dead of night, not as a lover but as an extension of his own voice. They tried to create life, over and over. Some children did not cry, others cried only to stop days later. One girl was born with such twisted limbs she was hidden forever in the house of silence. Another was crowned only to vanish before the harvest moon. Their blood, so concentrated, so sacred, had become poison, but still they prayed. Still they offered incense. Still they claimed the sun would heal the womb. But even light cannot purify what has rotted from within. He built her a palace within the palace, a shrine behind the shrine. And there she ruled in shadows, her eyes hollow with beauty, her fingers stiff with gold, her voice rarely heard by anyone but him. Some say she wept. Some say she disappeared years before his death. Some say he killed her, or buried her alive beneath the city of Akhenaten, where her bones could feed the roots of his theology. But most likely, she simply dissolved into myth, like the rest of his world. For Akhenaten's kingdom was never meant to last. It was a fever dream carved into sandstone, a place where the gods were made flesh and then forgotten. And in the center of that dream, he held her, not with tenderness, but with desperation, because only she could remind him that he had once been human. Only she could hold the parts of him that still bled. In her presence, he could pretend he was not alone. In her eyes, he saw not a sister, not a queen, not a lover, but a mirror. And when she vanished, the mirror cracked. And when the mirror cracked, so too did the illusion that the sun could hold a kingdom together. Akhenaten, the sacred city he carved from barren stone as a monument to singular divinity, began to rot from within. Walls that once shimmered in sunlight began to fracture. And the murals that showed endless affection between god and queen began to fade, like a dream trying to forget itself. The people no longer sang. The priests, who had once been silenced, began to murmur in hidden chambers. The army, starved of purpose and coin, looked southward, toward forgotten temples. And the children of the royal blood, those born of brother and sister, were either dead, dying, or marked with strange afflictions. Still, Akhenaten ruled. Alone now, she, his sister, his wife, his echo was gone. Her images became rare. Her name vanished from stele and stone. In some scenes, she was replaced by daughters. In others, her outline was chiseled away, as if she had never existed. Some believe she changed names, becoming a man to rule as his co-pharaoh. Others claim she died in childbirth, her sacred womb finally crumbling beneath the weight of too much divinity. But Akhenaten would not speak of her. Not to this court, not to the gods, perhaps not even to himself. He turned inward, deeper into his obsession with light and form and eternity. He built new statues, more monstrous than the last, with hips like a woman, chests swollen like a pregnant goddess, eyes too wide for life. These were not images of gods. They were projections of a soul, tearing at its own fabric. He renamed his children. He declared his daughters holy. He spoke of himself not as a man, but as the father and the mother of all. He whispered to Aten, in chambers soaked in sun, but dark in spirit. Outside, the people starved. The Nile had grown sick. The fields failed to rise. Merchants refused to pass through the sacred city. Egypt was bleeding, and its king was praying to his own reflection. The priests of Ammon, once cast out, began to grow teeth in the shadows. They remembered the old ways. They remembered a time when gods could be many, and pharaohs ruled in silence. Now, their revenge fermented in the south like spoiled wine, and Akhenaten. Some nights, they say, he would sit for hours in the empty halls, eyes locked on a fresco long faded, the only image of her untouched, where she smiled with serene terror, one hand on his arm, the other on her belly. And in that silence, the great king would weep not for her, but for the version of himself that once believed love could conquer death. For she was gone, and he remained. The sun no longer answered his prayers. The city was dying, and yet he refused to name an heir. Perhaps he could not bear the thought of another taking her place. Perhaps he believed the bloodline was too corrupted to continue. Or perhaps he believed he was eternal, that he and she, brother and sister, twin flames, twin wounds, would be reborn in every sunrise until the end of the world. But history does not wait for the dead to rise. It grinds forward, devouring empires, erasing prophets, and burying gods beneath the same dust that once held their altars. Akhenaten would die alone. His tomb unfinished, his city deserted. His name scraped from memory with such rage that even his bones may never be found. But something remained. Something always does. Whispers, rumors. The bones of a boy his son buried in golden splendor, twisted by generations of holy incest. The outline of a woman once carved into the heart of a king. The knowledge that even in the most sacred of unions, love can decay into obsession, and obsession into ruin. He married this sister, and in doing so, tried to marry himself. But even the sun cannot shine inwards forever. They thought they had erased him. They chiseled his name from the temples. They smashed his statues until only fingers and feet remained. They buried his city beneath centuries of sand. They spoke his name only as a warning of arrogance, of madness, of sacrilege. And yet Akhenaten returned, not in flesh, but in the silence between broken stones. In the eyes of his son, Tutankhamun, who inherited a kingdom sick with ghosts, the boy king was a child of that sacred incest, born of sister and brother, flesh of a cursed lineage. His body bore the proof: malformed foot, fragile skull, diseases hidden behind gold. He was not just the heir of a throne, he was the heir of a broken mirror. And though he tried to restore the old gods, to return Egypt to what it had been before his father turned the sun into a tyrant, it was too late. The blood had already spoken. The dynasty would end with him, buried in gold, untouched for 3,000 years. But Akhenaten's greatest monument was never stone. It was memory. Memory whispered in fragments of a queen whose name was erased, but whose presence haunted every line of his reign. Her face was sculpted and then destroyed, her name inscribed and then scratched away. Some say she became Smenkhare, the mysterious co-ruler who appeared just before the end, a man who may have been a woman, a sister reborn in masculine form. Others say she never died, but wandered into legend, hidden behind a veil of priestly lies. And perhaps that is why her absence feels heavier than her presence, for in her vanishing, she became eternal. The sister wife, the divine consort, the womb that held a dying son. Their love was not built on desire, nor choice, nor joy. It was architecture. It was theology. It was a mirror held too long before the soul. When you marry your sister, you marry the part of yourself that cannot lie. You marry memory. You marry shame. And in that union, Akhenaten saw the face of the divine, but also the abyss beneath it. The temples he built now crumble. The city he raised now sleeps beneath layers of forgotten dust. But somewhere, buried beneath tombs unopened, a fragment of her face may still survive: a cheekbone, a smile, a carved iris that once looked into the eyes of a god and saw only a brother. She was queen of the impossible, a wife without choice, a sister without escape. And in her silence, she outlasted him. She became myth, and myths do not rot, they evolve. So when we say, he married his sister, we do not speak only of ancient scandal. We speak of the hunger for purity that collapses into madness. We speak of dynasties built on bloodlines too tightly wound. We speak of gods made in our own broken image, and of kings who love not others but themselves. So deeply, they forget the difference. And so they stood, not as man and woman, nor as king and queen, but as incarnations of a myth older than the pyramids themselves. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, siblings in blood and flame, rulers of a kingdom built on the bones of gods and the whispers of the dead. Their union was not merely one of flesh, but of cosmic defiance and affront to the linear march of mortality. As temples rose to the sun, Diskaten, the old gods watched in silence, their statues crumbling, their names fading from stone. But vengeance in Egypt was never loud. It bloomed slowly, like lotuses on the Nile. Whispers of incest cloaked the royal court, yet the pharaoh declared it divine. He rewrote the myths, painted the heavens in his own image, and called it holy. The priests fumed in secret chambers, their chants now hollow, their power slipping through fingers like desert sand. In marrying his sister, Akhenaten believed he had purified the blood of Ra, but blood once mixed with desire becomes something else, something darker, something eternal. Their children were born brittle, strange of limb and skull, shaped by a lineage that defied nature. Was it divine mutation, or a punishment inscribed into their very genes by gods scorned? No one knew. But the palace halls echoed with silence broken only by the fragile coughs of cursed heirs. The people of Thebes turned their backs to the sun, once praised, now feared. Their fields withered under the scorching gaze of Aten. Their gods Osiris, Amen, Isis were desecrated, their images hacked from walls, their temples looted for gold to feed a city of blasphemy. And still Akhenaten smiled. He wandered palace gardens at night, barefoot, whispering to stars that no longer answered. Nefertiti watched him from shadows, her once adored beauty now masked by sorrow. She had become more ghost than queen, trapped in the very myth. She had helped to write, and the myth now alive devoured her slowly. It was said that one night, under a blood moon, Nefertiti entered the sacred chamber of mummification, not to prepare a corpse, but to pray. She offered her own blood in a silver bowl, calling not to Aten, but to the gods her husband had defiled. "Take me," she whispered, "but let the Nile forget." But Egypt never forgets. The land remembers the footsteps of sinners and saints alike. Her wish echoed into eternity, twisting through tombs, inscribed in hidden papyri, buried with slaves, lingering in the dust that dances in shafts of light. Akhenaten would later fall, his name erased by his successors, his statues shattered and dumped into pits. And yet, even erased, he lived on not in records, but in the cursed lineage of obsession, where love became tyranny and family became fate. In the Valley of the Kings, the tombs remain empty, disturbed, or sealed beyond reach. Archaeologists found fragments of ivory combs, golden sandals too small for adult feet, and in one unmarked sarcophagus filed flat. Was it a child, a lover, or the physical embodiment of a lineage not meant to be? No one knows, but when the desert wind howls over the ruined pillars of Akkadian, some say they still hear her voice, Nefertiti's, calling out to something ancient, begging for absolution that never came. Because in the end, Egypt does not punish with fire or blade. Egypt punishes with memory, and it remembers every forbidden kiss, every whispered lie, every crown placed on the wrong head.